Good day all, my name is Scott Narina. I am the full stack developer behind the website subs2go.ca, and today I'm just going to make a video discussing the application and all the technologies that are used for the development of this website. Now subs2go is a Java web application built with the Spring Boot framework, which and including a MySQL database on the back end. I'm before I get into the particulars of the technologies used for development of the site, I'm going to talk a little bit about the function of the site and what it is. So looking at the home page, you can see it is a website designed for fitness instructors, and essentially it is an employment tool. What it is, instructors can register accounts with subs2go, and that would be fitness instructors of different disciplines. They can then set up their profiles and set up their work availability and make themselves available for work to potential employers. And just to give you an idea of how this works, I will log in. I've set up two accounts here for this demonstration. The first is an instructor account, and we'll take a look at that. Now, I'm not a yoga instructor, but I've set up this account in my name. I've called myself a yoga instructor with the company in subs2go, and I'm saying that I'm located in the San Francisco Bay Area, California, USA. And on login, I come to this dashboard page where I have access to my profile, availability, search, messages, shop, and account icons here. You can look at the profile, and in the setup of this is the meat of the application. This is the public information that would be available to an employer who would search the database looking for a substitute fitness instructor. In the profile, I can set a work biography, and then I can include all the various information relative to my profession, discipline, company name, online instruction, styles of yoga that I might teach, etc. Now, in my after logged in, as I mentioned, I might go straight to the dashboard, and if I had messages waiting or if my availability was out of date, I would see an indicator up in the top right-hand corner indicating that this needs to be reset. And if we look at availability, this is key because obviously if you don't set any availability, potentially you would not be found in any searches by employers. So in this instance, for sake of demonstrating the function of the app, I'm going to set my work availability through this current 2-week period. I can see these, it's October 11th through the 24th. This is the current 2-week period in a rolling 2 weeks through the year. And these 4 days have passed, so these JavaScript code has been used to deactivate these selectors. But from Thursday, October 15th forward, it is possible to select morning, afternoon, and evening. Now, for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to say that I'm available Thursday, October 15th in the morning, and I would also have the ability to set notifications if this availability information were out of date. Then by clicking this box here, I would receive a notification from subs2go advising me to reset my availability. I could then also select this option for general availability, which will allow employers to contact me even for dates beyond this 2-week period. So that's just general availability. And then this option, online instruction, basically indicates that I'm available for work and I'm capable of managing an online class. So that's basically it. And if I'm an instructor looking for a sub, I can I can search by location, category, work zones, and then I could select times. If I wanted to just search generally, I can just set a start or end date. If I'm looking for a particular date, I can set it using this date picker, and I don't need to set an end date. I can also select times of day if that's pertinent to my search. Now, for the sake of demonstrating the functionality of this, as I mentioned, I've set up my account. I've said that I'm available to work on Thursday, October the 15th, and if you recall in my profile, I'm a yoga instructor in the San Francisco Bay Area. I teach Bikram style of yoga, and I'm willing to work in, my work zone is defined as Marin County. Now, if I've opened up here a second window in incognito mode, and I'm going to log into another account that I created, which is an employer account. Now, employers do not need to set up detailed profiles. It's just basic information. When they log in, they would not have an option for a profile because it's not important for an employer, but they do have the ability. Their public information is basically that they are an employer, their company name and their location. They have the ability to search, send and receive messages, and manage their account. And in logging in here, again, if I had messages waiting, there would be an indicator icon on the top of this icon here. However, at this point, I want to search, so I'm going to search. Now, if it was necessary, I could change my search location. My search location will define the work zones. A location is very general. Work zones a little more fine-tuned. So basically, living in San Rafael, California, which is just outside of San Francisco, it is relative to these counties, San Francisco Bay Area. So anyway, I am going to search for a yoga instructor, and I'm going to search for a Bikram instructor, and I'm going to say I'm looking in Marin County. And let's say that I'm looking for an instructor who's available to teach online classes. And very specifically, I'm looking for someone who's willing to work Thursday, October 15th in the morning. So having selected all those options and click search, the results come back. I found one available instructor, and that is the profile that I showed earlier. Below the list of instructors that were found in the search, you can review the parameters, which again, yoga in San Rafael, online instruction. I'm looking for a Bikram instructor who's willing to work in Marin County. So that is me, Robert Narina. Now, if I click here, I can get to the profile, and this is the public profile that an employer will see based on an instructor found in a search, and profile picture, location information, company name, a work biography, and then all the various information about their profession, resumes, certification documents. These documents will open up in separate windows, and then also social media accounts. Again, if you click on these, they'll open up in separate windows. And then below all this is the very specific match date and time with our search. So we can see here that I am available on Thursday, October the 15th in the morning, and that was the specific search date. Now, if everything is good, I've reviewed all the information here, and I'm happy. I can send a message to this user by clicking the compose message box, and here we are. All the fields are filled out by default by the application, and I can freeform type a message here if I wish, or I may select this quick add message button, and that just simply populates a message which is just the basics of what we're looking for. I'm looking for a yoga instructor to lead a class on this date in the morning. So if everything is good here, I can just then hit send, and the message will be sent out. Now, subs2go does not share email addresses or phone numbers, so all the messaging is handled internally, and the end user is simply going to receive a notification from subs2go that they have a message waiting for them in the system. So I'll show you that by going back here, and if I open up a new window and I look at Gmail, you can see that I've got a message right here, and I've actually sent this to myself a couple times, but this is the most recent one, and it's basically just a message indicating that I have received a message in the system. So now if I go back to this account and log in again, you can see that I have a message waiting for me right here, and that's indicated by this checkbox. And if I click into that, I can then see in my inbox that I have this message, and I'm just messaging myself, of course, which is a little confusing, but this is me. This is the message about looking for a substitute yoga instructor on the morning of Thursday, October 15th of this year. And if I was agreeable to this, I can then just simply click reply and send a response to that employer. And at this point, I'd be free to share any information that I wish to secure that job and take it from there. So that is the meat of subs2go, and now I'm going to move on to the particulars of how this application is actually, how it was built, and the technologies that I've used to put it into production. Now, again, as I mentioned, this is a Spring Boot web application that was built using the Spring Boot framework in combination with a MySQL database on the back end. Now, in one of the beauties of Spring Boot is that it comes bundled. You basically take your application and you bundle it with a Tomcat web server. So it's not something that you don't need to manage an external server with Spring Boot, because you have the option to embed the Tomcat web server. And in my app, it's actually, I basically create what's called an executable jar, which is the entire application packaged with a Tomcat web server. And when it is executed, the application listens for URL requests made to that application on port 8080. And in production, I actually use an Apache web server that is listening on port 8080 and acting as proxy, forwarding requests to the Tomcat web server. So in Spring Boot, I'm using the Spring Tool Suite to build the Spring Boot application, subs2go, and let's see here. What can I say about this? This is a Java application. It uses a build system called Maven, which uses this POM file, where all the dependencies, that are used in this application, are managed through this POM file. And I'm using various technologies. In particular, as I mentioned, the application works in conjunction with a MySQL database. Now, all the data is managed through a dependency called Spring Data JPA, which is an object relational mapping framework that allows us to take a class or data object and map it directly to tables and fields in the MySQL database. And this is quite powerful, because with just some very basic configuration, you can set up a CRUD repository, which gives you easy access to the CRUD methods of creating, reading, updating, and deleting entities that are persisted by object relational mapping in the MySQL database. So basically, in the Java application, I create these entities, which again are basically with just simple annotations. This is part of the Spring Boot framework, and the dependencies. Using these annotations, we can then automatically map the data of this user info object back to the MySQL database. And then using the repository, just by simply extending this method, CRUD repository, this gives me access to all the methods, and including some custom methods that I have defined for manipulating collections of user data that are persisted in the MySQL database. Now, in Spring Boot, as a web application, I'm using the model view controller setup, and the way that works, I'll give you an example here. I've created a package called controller, which the class in here is actually annotated controller, and this tells Spring Boot to treat this class as a controller of web requests and to manage mappings. For example, this is an annotation for a get mapping request to the login page, and because this is a controller class and this particular method is annotated get mapping, and therefore the application knows that any get request to this URL is going to be handled by this method. So that's basically how Spring MVC works. Now, as I mentioned, the repository that was created here, it is instantiated and passed into this controller class with dependency injection, which is managed using this annotation called auto-wired, and this is a very powerful feature of the Spring Boot framework, where I am simply passing in the user info service, which is our repository, dependency injecting into this through the class constructor, and that makes all the CRUD methods related to our user info repository are all then available to the different methods that are defined inside this particular controller class. And as you can see, I've created controllers for all the different core functions of the application: searching, managing user data, messaging, file management, etc. So that is the power of the Spring Boot framework and model view controller with the Spring Data JPA. Now, also one of a very powerful feature that I've also included here is I'm building my my web pages using a front-end framework called TimeLeaf, and this allows for easy passing of objects and data. It's the web pages are server-side rendered, and data from our backend are passed as objects and values, and are interpolated by TimeLeaf code as the web pages are generated and before they're passed back from the server to the client web browser and then displayed to the user. I'm not going to go into too much detail with that, but basically it is a very powerful means of displaying data in your web pages. Okay. So I think that's where I'm going to end with just the basics of the application itself. But I wanted to get into basically how I'm managing development in my local system, and then also my pathway to production. So basically, I'm running this application. I'm using. I'm able to I do have some dev tools functionality in here, which allows me to do some make some live changes to templates, so I don't have to restart the application, which is quite handy. But once I've made changes, I would then, if I'm ready to release to production, I am also using Docker. And Docker, if you don't know, is an orchestrating tool where all the various parts of your application can be isolated into their own separate containers. And then I also use a orchestrating method called Docker Compose, which then allows me to start and stop all the various services of the application within one command. So what I do is I'm on a Windows 10 machine, and for purposes of development, I'm running Windows subsystem for Linux, and then I'm also using the Docker desktop tool. And what I do with this is I've written some configuration files basically to build containers for the various pieces of my application. That would be the Java Spring Boot application, the MySQL database, and the Apache web server. So those three services make up the application that is subs2go. And the way that this will work, and I will show you, just launching. I'm using the new Windows terminal, and I'm actually logged into Ubuntu. And if I change directory to where I have Docker in the Docker folder on the root at the user root, and a subfolder called subs2go.docker, and in here I've got. This is where you can see I've set up folders for the Apache proxy server, Java, which this is the folder that's containing our Spring Boot application, and then MySQL. This is the database, of course, and then other folders that are key to the application. User data. This is where all the profile pictures are, and user resumes and certification documents would all be kept in this user data folder. And in Docker Compose, if we look at that, you can see that I've got various services listed here: the proxy server, Java server, and then MySQL database. And you can see that they run. I'm using Docker Compose to build and launch all my services. They build from a context which is these folders, and within those folders is a Docker file for each that represents all the build configuration for that particular service. So this is the build folder and the Docker file for Apache web server, which is listening on port 80 on the host and forwarding to port 80 inside the container. The Java application, which is our Spring Boot application, same. It's the context is the Java folder, and it's reading a Docker file. It's setting up a host name of Java, and it has some volume connected, which is the user data files. So that's the folder that contains all of the user image files and resume and certification documents. And then again, this one also is listening on port 8080 on the host and forwarding to port 8080 on the container. Restart always just simply means if for any reason the application, the service should stop, it should automatically restart. And then the order of start depends on, means that this application will start after the MySQL database would start. So basically, because the Java application has to communicate with the MySQL database, so basically that allows MySQL to start first, then Java will follow. And we're using Vim here. Just for sake of, let's take a look at, I'm going to cd into the Java folder, and then I'm going to look at the Docker file. And as mentioned, the way the Docker file works, it builds the container from a base image, and then we just include the instructions of all the features that we need inside of this particular container. And here we are just copying in our application, subs2go.jar is being copied into the home directory. It's being the executable bit is being set on that. We're changing to that directory, and then we are touching it, and then the entry point for our application, it basically launches the Java application using the profile that we've defined. In this particular instance, it's container. We're running a jar file in that folder, and so basically that's just going to launch the application. Okay, so let's close this, and we'll get back out of here. So now we're in the root of the of our subs2go application, and the way we can launch all these services is with Docker Compose. And up.-d simply will launch all as background services. So now, having done that, I can go and I can see that the services are all running 12 seconds ago, and we can see the ports that are being forwarded. See the Apache server is listening on home, forwarding port 80 to port 80 in the container. The MySQL database is listening on port 3306, default port for MySQL. And then the Java application, which is a Tomcat web server, again is listening on port 8080. Now, if I wanted to confirm that everything is up and running properly, I can do this, where I can attach to the container by the ID, and here we can see that we're seeing the logs generated from the subs2go application, subs2go Java application. We can see that it has started and it is ready and waiting. So I can go back to the browser and type in localhost, and that's just going to make a request on port 80, and again that's going to be picked up by the Apache Tomcat server, or sorry, the Apache web server, and then it will be forwarded internally inside of Docker to the Tomcat web server listing on port 8080. And now I have the ability to log in as a user, and voila, I have all the functionality of the website is up and running. Now, now in the development process, if I'm working on changes to either the database or to the application itself, I would want to test those changes, and then once I was ready to implement or to put a new version into production, I would then want to pass the new generate a new executable jar file, and then add that into the Docker environment, rebuild the appropriate service, and then relaunch Docker. And the way that I do that is, now I need to check here. Now I do have two configurations of application profile, and I just need to confirm that I've got an application. If I were running it locally, I could use this production profile, but because I'm running the application inside of Docker, I'm going to use this container profile, and that's simply a difference between how the application communicates with the MySQL database, depending on whether it's running on a local PC environment or within the containerized environment. So now everything's good here. I've made some changes to my application, and I'm ready to generate a new version. I would simply go run, build. Again, this is a Maven. This is a Maven build, and it's going to then package up my application. Again, packaging it with the Tomcat web server, and it will then output all as an executable jar in the target folder, which is defined right here. Now we'll let that finish, and it doesn't take very long. It's pretty speedy, and once it's done, we'll have a confirmation message, and everything looks good there. So we've got our Maven has packaged, and we have build success. Now if I look at this target folder, I can open this up in my System Explorer, and then in here I'm going to use Windows Terminal and open up Ubuntu. And see, we can see here that a new jar file has been created for us here, and that tells us that this is the file actually that would need to be copied over to the Windows subsystem Linux, and then copied into our container in order to launch the new version of the application. Now I'm going to close this, and I'm going to go up here. And here I've created some tools that I will also open. And let's see here. Okay, I'm going to use tmux to split this window. And whoops. All right. I have created a couple bash files just to automate the process for moving a newly created jar file, so our executable jar, over to our Windows subsystems Linux, and basically rebuild the Java application and then relaunch. And that's done with this script file, which I'll show you what that looks like. And basically, it is I'm simply CDing into the directory within my Spring Tool Suite IDE, the target directory where the new jar file was created, and I am copying that file, which is right here. I'm copying it to the user directory in Windows Subsystem Linux under Docker, subs2go Docker into the Java folder. And the reason that you're using the Windows Subsystem Linux bash is that within this this terminal you actually have access to both the Windows file system and the Linux file systems of Windows Subsystems Linux. So you can pass data back and forth. There are some issues around doing that. There are some incompatibilities, in particular file line endings, for example. So there are some things to be wary of, but it can be done, and there's ways. You just have to be careful about what you do. For example, this script had to be written using the WSL bash, and I cannot edit this file in Windows, otherwise I'll run into trouble. But anyway, so as I mentioned, that this script, when executed here, it will move to that directory, the target directory. It will copy the newly created jar file over to Windows Subsystem Linux. It will then cd into that directory. It will check if there is an old version that had been changed to temp. It will then remove it if it exists. It will take the existing version of the application, change its name by adding .temp TMP to it. It will then change the new version, the new copied file, change its name to subs2go.jar. We'll then cd up one directory, so that's the master directory where our Docker Compose file exists that lists all the different services. It then runs this Docker Compose down command, which will stop all running services and delete all containers. And then Docker Compose build, no cache, will rebuild the Java service listed in the Docker Compose file without using any cache data. So it's basically going to start clean. It then once it's completed, it then will execute the Compose up, which will again run all the services as a daemon, and then and basically at that point we are looking at all the Docker services running again with the new version of the program running. So I will, just for the sake of demonstrating, I will quit here and executing this file. You can see that it is stopping the services. And now it's already done all the copying, and now it's rebuilding all the Java application, and it is then launching all the services. And then you can see here that everything now is up and running. These are all the services up and running, and at this point we could go to local host, and we can then we can go and test the particular feature that we changed, and just confirm that everything is working correctly. And there you go. The application is up and running. We can interact normally, and we would expect to see whatever changes that we made in the system to be represented here in the newly uploaded version of our application. And at this point, let's see here. If I go to the Docker folder, this is a Git repository, and I can then check the status, and I've made a variety of changes here. So I would basically then commit all the changes that I made here and upload them to GitHub, and then I could log into my remote server, pull the current version of this repo down, and then relaunch all the services on the production environment, and good to go with the new version of subs2go. So just like that same process of launching a new version of the app, we can do the same thing with the database, and that is managed through a different file here. So as I have this bash script which moves the jar, this bash script is designed to manage uploading a new version of the database. So that is if through the development process fields were added into an entity object, and then again through using Spring Boot JPA, when you add a new entity a new field to a class data object that's identified as an entity, that field would then be persisted to the database. And if I did that on my local environment, I would then execute a command well, basically, let's just walk through it. So basically, I want to create a new version of the database that I will then pass as an SQL file over to the Docker environment, and then basically reload the MySQL instance, or rebuild the MySQL container with the new database. And then I would expect to see any new fields or any changes to the database to be represented in the new version. So this bash script, just similarly in this particular folder, it checks for an instance of an old instance of the database that had been labeled as temp. It then deletes it. It takes the existing version of the database, adds a temp extension, and then runs a command. This is for a locally running MySQL database. You're using MySQL dump and logging in as root with a password, and then taking this database and exporting it to this SQL file. Now, the command then removes the existing SQL database file from the folder inside Docker, and then it copies this new version that we just created over to that same place. We then move to the Docker container. We run Docker compose down, stops all the services running in Docker. We then remove the volume. There's a volume associated with the MySQL database, and this is how you persist the information of changes inside a MySQL database running inside of Docker. Now, obviously, this piece, I'm using this here because I want to see the fresh database. But otherwise, there are other ways of persisting and backing up your database that may be better for production environments. But in this instance, we are removing this persistence layer, this volume, and we are passing in a new database that should have all the existing information plus any additional fields that we might have added as part of our development process. We are rebuilding the MySQL image with no cache, so it is a fresh build. We are then running Docker Compose up, which starts all of the services, and then again we would be up and running with a new version of MySQL running inside of the Docker environment. All right, now for the sake of demonstrating, I will do that. So again, I'm using Vim, and I will quit that, and let's run. Oops, my mistake. In order to back up or to make a new version of the database running locally, you need to actually start the server locally. And the reason for this is that the MySQL dump command is not going to do anything without a running version of the server. So now we can see here from the notifier that it is running. And so now if we run this script and enter the password, so what it did was it removed that temp version. It copied existing version to temp. It then executed the MySQL dump. It then copied the file over into the subsystem Linux file system in the Docker subs2go.docker folder. It closed off all the running services, removed the volume. It rebuilt the MySQL container, and then you can see here that it created the new volumes and everything is up and running. So now if I go Docker PS, you can see that we've got our 3 services are running, listening on the appropriate ports. And if we go again, local host, that's going to hit the Apache server. It's going to forward to the Java application and the Tomcat server listening on port 8080, and that maps to our login page. And then we enter in some credentials, and that information is passed to back again to our controller classes and mapped through to the MySQL database. The credentials are validated and we're logged in. So now we can see that we're looking. And at this point, if we wanted to, what we did was we added a new database. Now, if we wanted to actually confirm that whatever fields were updated in the tables of the database, we could actually manually log into that database from Docker. So now we can see here our MySQL database is actually identified by this container ID. So we can go using this syntax, exec IT, and we'll copy. And normally you could just use bash, but in the Alpine containers we use bin/sh, and that takes us, we're now logged into the container, and from here, because it's MySQL, we can take a look at we're logging in as a user and indicating that we want to deal with the subs2go database. And we're now logged into the container at the MySQL CLI, and here we can show database. So we can see that we're these are the two. We have the subs2go database, and then we can also go show tables. And these are all the various tables that we defined as entities in our application. And if we wanted to, we could query as we would, let's say, so that's an example of a query. Let's say, for example, if that were a field that we had changed, we would be able to see it here. Now this is obviously an encrypted password, so that's meaningless, but we could also do something like this. And then obviously this will show us, and we could pipe it through if we had a lot of information, but this will show us that we have added the new field, and anything the database is updated correctly. So anyway, that's MySQL running inside of Docker as part of our containerized web application for subs2go. All right, I think that's a lot. If you made it this far, you are a champ. I know I'm tired, and you probably are too, but thank you very much for watching, and see you soon. Bye.